going now.
Now it's going. Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty Ackett, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator here for the library. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the reading by Jeff Van Sandy. I have a few organizations to thank tonight. One is the Friends of Peter White Public Library. If you're watching this on YouTube tonight or after the fact, you have them to thank for it. They purchased all of the live streaming equipment for us. So much of what we do here at Peter White Public Library we couldn't do without the Friends. So I have to thank them. All right. So just a few words of introduction. Jeff and I have known each other for a very long time. I think back in the early 90s is when we first sort of crossed paths at Northern Michigan University in the English department. Actually I think that my wife, who's seen in the back there, had a poetry class with him and Beverly, and Beverly was the teacher of that. So it's like really small connected worlds here. So after we first met in the 1990s, we sort of both went our own ways to graduate school and teaching families and writing. But every once in a while, our paths always seem to cross in strange ways at conferences. I think one time you came to Book World when I was working there and did a signing there. So just strange coincidences that brought us together. The universe seems to do that in random and surprising ways. And tonight's reading isn't any different. Jeff was releasing his new book, and he was looking for a venue to do reading in his hometown. And I just so happen now to be the adult programming coordinator for Peter White Public Library. And so I was able to give him this venue to do his reading. And like I said, the universe is really random and surprising in the way that it keeps on bringing us together. Just a couple, you probably all know Jeff. It seemed like he was hugging everybody when you came in the room. But
I just do that. I get in a lot of trouble.
You do? Okay, all right. But for those who might be watching on YouTube, I'll just give you a little bit of background about Jeff. Jeff teaches fiction writing, screenwriting, and film production at Delta College in downstate Michigan. His award-winning short films have been accepted over 200 times in national and international film festivals. His books of fiction include the short story collections Emergency Stopping and Threatened Species. His novels include Into the Desperate Country, Landscape with Fragmented Figures, and American Poet, and Detroit Muscle. The one book from 2012, American Poet, won a Michigan Notable Book Award from the Library of Michigan. And in 2020, Whistling Shade Press released his new collection of books, stories, the Neighborhood Division stories, and he's going to be reading from his new novel, Rules of Order. So without further ado, please welcome Jeff Van Sandy.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to my family for being here and hosting me, so I have a place to stay. Thanks to the library. Thanks to NMU for also helping promote this. Marty mentioned, in 2020, this book of short stories, the Neighborhood Division, came up, but there was something going on in 2020 that made readings difficult. I forget what it was. We're through it, it's over, it wasn't that bad. No, obviously the pandemic had a little effect on promoting that book, but there's actually a short story in here called Load, which I realized had the potential to be expanded into a novel. So that's the short story in here is eventually what became Rules of Order. So I need to, before I start reading, it's different for people who've read some of my other work. This is not the same as those in that this is a dystopia, so it is set in the future. So I guess if you're Netflix streaming person. What would it be? Handmaid's Tale, Snowpiercer, probably Hunger Games would be a familiar one. But prior to those, I mean, it was Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. So these writers who will set their books in like a near future, usually within 150 to 200 years in the future, and usually are trying to kind of shed some light on something that's currently going on. So they'll set it in the future and then really kind of turn the volume up on the problem, and it's supposed to make us think about our world. So in rules of order, just to kind of set the world for you a little bit, because I think it will make hearing the first chapter more enjoyable. And you have to imagine, it takes place in the city. The city is wrecked. It's uninhabitable. It's toxic. You can't go outside. And the only habitable place is this huge high-rise building. And there are, it doesn't really get into how they are, but there are actually automated factories on the outskirts of the city still producing goods. There's automated farms that are still producing something equivalent to food for people to eat. But you have this huge high-rise building, and life as we know it kind of goes on in the building. There are schools in the building, there are restaurants in the building, like everything that we have, to some extent, they have in the building. But one of the things that's happening, and this gets revealed in the first chapter too, though, our main character, Harvey Crow, is part of a group of activists who are aware that the infrastructure of the building is under threat. Like there's too many people on the upper floors are buying too many possessions for their apartments. So there are weight issues, and there's kind of a corrupt co-op board that runs the building, and they're kind of letting this go on because there's money to be made by letting people continue to buy possessions. There's talk of adding more penthouse level floors to the building for people on the upper floors to live in, but all of that too puts the last habitable space, as far as they know on the planet, under threat of collapsing. So when this first chapter that I'm going to read you starts out in Harvey Crow's bedroom. I think he's woken by something, and you find out that he's had a long day up on the upper floors trying to petition to people to get rid of some of their goods, etc. But that's the basic setting of the novel, so hopefully that helps. Did everybody hear me all right? Okay, so I'll begin. Harvey Crow blinked his eyes open into the dim light of his bedroom. More often than not, it was nightmares that woke him lately. Prophetic hallucinations of the impending collapse. Black and white visions from his subconscious haunted his deepest sleep. They were images he fought to keep at bay during his waking hours. If he didn't, they could leave him nearly paralyzed for hours. In the dreams, the towering building he lived in, they all lived in, stood momentarily, but then, as if pressed from above by a giant invisible hand, it began to disintegrate. The unseen palm pushed as though on a collapsible telescope, but with such determined force as to drive the lenses shattering into each other. Plumes of debris spread outward from random floors like rings of a planet, and then the building was gone. Nothing but dust and death dissolving into the gray, lifeless landscape around it. But he recalled no such dream. He wasn't entangled in chilled, sweat-soaked sheets. His heartbeat and breathing were normal. None of the metallic taste of adrenaline coated the inside of his mouth. No, something else had woken him. The building's pipes hummed in the walls and echoed with the sound of water and waste moving up and down the multitude of copper and PVC lengths. A loud groan signaled what the building's board of directors had come to call a settling sequence. Harmless, they said, not unlike when people get older and lose height. a natural consequence of aging. Good bones, they said. The building has good bones. The thump and churn of water in the pipes, the haunted moans of the building settling, his sleep had been soundtracked by them for so long that he knew that's not what had woken him. It couldn't have been. They were like white noise to him. Even distant shouting in the hallway or the screams of an assault hardly made him stir, not for indifference but for familiarity. On his wall, a reflection from the dim nightlight's glow highlighted the reinforcing epoxy that filled a 5-foot-long crack in the concrete. He could see where the fissure was growing several inches past the epoxy's reach. Cracks had become so epidemic that for the last 6 months, members of the maintenance crew could be seen lugging huge caulking guns and pounding on the doors of the lower floors. The expense had become enough for the board to implement an epoxy tithe. The new tax fell on tenants who lived on the 20th floor and lower. Reassuring letters from the board explained that more than a filler, the epoxy, once fully cured, was stronger than the concrete, like that of a healed broken bone. Crow's mother had worked as a nurse in the building's sub-level infirmary. She told him that the idea of a fractured bone healing stronger than before was just a myth. It's true, she'd said, that a cuff of strong new bone forms around the break site to protect it. So for a short time, the fracture is stronger, but the cuff goes away over time. Then you just get regular old bone. He smiled into the darkness, remembering this. His mother had always taken the time to explain the world to him. As an only child, he was treated by his mother and father almost as a third adult in their home, even from a young age. They didn't talk in code around him, and when he asked questions, they gave honest answers. Being raised that way had not made for an easy childhood when his school years started. To him, his peers lacked curiosity and seemed woefully uninformed. To them, he was a know-it-all and the teacher's pet. His mind went to Dagmar, and he wondered what she would have thought of him in his school days. She probably would have bullied him too. And now somehow they were aligned as members of a group set on saving the fate of the building. She was by far the most militant member with ideas that scared him. One of Dagmar's experts had looked into the claims about the epoxy, and they too were dishonest, he determined. More goddamn lies from the board, Dagmar had said, throwing a knife that stuck into the baseboard of Crow's kitchen. He winced at the memory of her anger, her combat boots, her sneer, her lips, her passion, her lithe body. Stop it, he thought. Her language more and more suggested that drastic measures were needed, even if it meant violence. He couldn't let his loneliness keep him from seeing the danger she could be to the cause. She could ruin everything if he let his guard down. Waiting for the other shoe to drop, that's all this is, she hissed. Except it won't be a shoe. Sparked by an impulse, a desire for words, something in the face of Dagmar's ominous ranting, Crow had told her the history of the old saying. What saying? Waiting for the other shoe to drop, he said. In tenement buildings in New York, the construction was so shoddy, people could hear the slightest movements of their neighbors. Her face registered little interest. The bedrooms were built one above the other. So, well, at night, he continued, people would sit on the edge of their beds, unlacing their shoes. Removing one, they'd let it drop to the floor, startling awake their neighbor below. He studied her short, spiked hair, wondering if it could puncture his palm. Dagmar bent forward to retrieve her knife from the baseboard. Are you listening? He asked. Yes, she said, taking her seat again. She ran the tip of her blade under a fingernail. Just hurry up with your story. That's it. The neighbor below would lie awake, staring up at the darkened ceiling, unable to go back to sleep, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I get it, she said, fascinating, Crow. He looked at the floor and then up at her again. It's a metaphor, too. The way we are thoughtless actions can ripple into the lives of others. The way, that's your problem, she said, standing and sheathing her knife. I mean, you're good. You're good with words. Your newsletter, talking to people on the upper floors, it's a gift. But your belief in words feels naive. Stories, speeches, electronic posts, sometimes they aren't enough. She walked to his door, opened it, and before it fully closed behind her said, "And when their usefulness has ended, then it's time for action." The last he saw of her was the sheath strapped to her belt. The sound of the latch clicking into the strike plate echoed in the room long after she'd left, as though some bigger door had closed. Crow threw off his blanket and turned on his lamp. He sat on his bed in the yellowed light. He thought of Dagmar more than he wanted to. She was the closest thing to female companionship he'd known in years. Proximity to her had grown into fondness, even if she was different from him, angry and fierce. He would force himself to remember that she was the de facto leader of the Anti-Collapse Trust, or ACT, and the cause worked best if he kept his thoughts for her professional. Plus, he was going to have to keep his wits around her if he was going to be able to temper her rage. Startling him, the voices of the building's superintendent and his wife echoed in a nearby vent. He shook his head, guessing that maybe it was their bickering that had woken him. By some cruel twist of ductwork, his bedroom vent was like a phone receiver eavesdropping on their heated exchanges in the basement-level apartment that they occupied together. "Anya, that's it. I'm putting tape down the middle of the living room," the super yelled up through the vent's tinny resonance. "The kitchen and bathroom will be neutral territory. Otherwise, you stay on your side." Crow rolled his eyes. It sounded like something from a bad comedy he'd once seen. "I hate you," she yelled back. "All you've ever done is lie to me. From the beginning, you are the worst thing that ever happened to me." "Venom, that's all you have, woman. You're like a snake." Crow went to his bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, propping himself with his palms against the edge of the sink, he examined his bloodshot eyes and ashen skin. He was too young for so much gray hair. How long had it been since he had a full night's sleep, eaten a decent meal, did anything other than worry about the fate of the building? Days had become years, and yet, what, if anything, had changed? Most tenants carried on as though nothing were happening. He grabbed a towel from the metal rack that dangled from loose drywall anchors. Back in the bedroom, he covered the vent with the towel, muffling the arguing coming from the super's apartment. He fell into bed again, feeling the exhaustion of another fruitless day on the upper floors, knocking on doors, imploring tenants to consider the weight of their things. There were rumors of new hot tubs, gas fireplaces with stone mantles, and new deep freezers. Few cared to listen to him. Some slammed their doors. Others opened their doors only as wide as their chain locks would allow. They admitted to having heard the rumors and load warnings too, but what could be done? Others confronted him. They'd earned their money, and it was their right to spend it however they wanted. They didn't want to hear about the size of the cracks in the lower level apartments. Air pockets, they countered when he explained that one part of the building had sunk 2 inches in 6 years. Buildings settle into soft soil is perfectly natural. It was as though they had memorized the board's letters of assurance. Predictions of a complete building collapse made most laugh or shake their heads. Doom and gloom, they said, pointing out their frosted windows towards the hazy shadow of the building's buttressing exoskeleton. They spoke confidently of the board's plan to install 20 new steel pilings to brace the foundation. For most of the day, the pilings were the biggest counterargument he heard. 20 new steel pilings. The board planned to move on Operation Steel in the next few weeks. After that, there would be nothing to worry about, they said. Sometimes, standing in a tenant's doorway, he felt even himself being convinced of the foresight and wisdom of the board. He tried to counter with the arguments that he and Dagmar had laid out. The foundation had never been constructed for so many residents. their excessive belongings, or the addition of more floors. His arguments felt worn and out of date compared to the progressive talk of the steel pilings. A handful of tenants did listen and admitted their doubts about the pilings or anything to do with the board's promises. "I don't trust Burke," they said of the board's chairman. Crow gave such tenants his name and his phone number in addition to his pamphlets, which also included his contact information. He snapped open his dozing eyes to a blaring sound. After a moment, the telephone rang a second time. His thoughts immediately went to his parents, something wrong with his mother or father. Then, as he always did, he remembered that they had both passed away 2 years ago. A gas line had fractured in their apartment, asphyxiating both of them in their sleep. The board's tenant liaison member had called him with the news and condolences, naming it an unfortunate and unforeseeable accident. Dagmar had approached him then, explaining that the building had experienced a load-related shift that had cracked the gas line. "Your parents are dead due to negligence and greed-induced blindness," she had said to him. Then she'd said more, all of it related to the inevitable collapse of the building. For Crow, their meeting was an awakening. He quit his job writing marketing copy for Just Like Water, and soon after joined ACT in their efforts to save the building. As his parents' only child, he was the beneficiary of a meager life insurance policy that allowed him to eke out a subsistence living while messaging for the cause. He picked up the ringing phone's receiver. Even its lightness felt like a brick in his hand. "Hello?" For a moment, he only heard labored breathing coming through the small speaker against his ear. Then, "Can you help me?" a voice asked, old and raspy. "What?" "I fell trying to get water. I can't get off the floor." Crow sat up. "Why are you calling me?" Your number was on a flyer under my door." He rubbed his itchy eyes. "Well, we're just trying to inform tenants. Can you help me?" Crow lingered for a moment with the cold of the phone against his ear. "I'm tired. Is there anybody else you could call?" The voice sounded ready to crack into sobbing. "I don't have anybody else. Just my aide, but she won't come again for 2 days. I'd call her, but the agency doesn't share the aide's phone numbers." He explained that the agency line itself went directly to an automated answering service. Crow listened to his stomach rumbling from having skipped both lunch and dinner. "It's okay," the voice said. "I'll be okay." "No," Crow said. "I'll come. What apartment?" The man gave him a room number 9 floors above him. He exhaled. His thighs ached from the flights he'd been up and down earlier in the day. "Just give me a few minutes." The deadened voices of the super and his wife continued their endless squabbling under the towel. "I'll slide the key under the door," the voice said. Crow imagined the frail body belonging to the voice lying on a doormat, shivering, waiting for his arrival. "I'm on my way," he said, hanging up. He quickly dressed and stepped out into the flickering, dim light of the hallway. The smell of cooked cabbage filled his nostrils. In the darker sections where the sconces were burned out, he felt his hand along the wall. Peeling paint fell to the floor in his wake. He couldn't remember how many work orders he'd sent to the maintenance department regarding the lighting on his floor. Each request was met with a reminder that the board had made Operation Epoxy a priority over all other maintenance issues, after which his request would be addressed in the order in which it was received. Crow pressed his shoulder into the rusty fire door at the end of the hallway that led into the stairwell. Because they'd stopped working years ago, the lock sets and latch sets had been removed. The door swung open easily and then closed itself again behind him. He started up the stairwell, counting the floors as he went, his legs burning. At least there was no security gates on the lower landings to deal with. When he was 2 flights from his destination, he saw a silhouette descending toward him. "I don't have anything of value," Crow said, as naturally as saying hello. "That's fine, I don't want anything." He recognized the deep voice as belonging to Gerald Lamarck, one of the newest and youngest board members. Crow had watched the open board meeting when Lamarck had been voted in and confirmed, where most members of the board focused their public speeches on the desire of those on the upper floors. Lamarck had seemed to be trying to address the needs of everyone. He had his concerns about the building's living conditions on the lower floors. Rumor had it that he was not popular with the older board members and was likely to be voted out in the next cycle. They would run a candidate against him aggressively. Director Lamarck. The trim silhouette stopped on the landing several steps above. Crow continued until he stood on the landing next to him. "What are you doing down here, sir?" Lamarck's face was a Rorschach of shadows in the flickering glow of the landing's light fixture. "Just taking a look. I've been told that sometimes what I'm being told about the condition of the lower floors isn't entirely true." Crow smiled and nodded. It's late though, sir. Insomnia. "I see. How?" Lamarck asked, smiling, "in this light?" Crow confirmed that lighting had been an issue for some time. Lamarck crossed his arms. "Well, you know me. Who are you?" Crow reached out to shake his hand. "Harvey Crow. I'm with the Anti-Collapse Trust," he said, but then immediately wished he hadn't. Lamarck bristled and then walked past Crow's extended hand. "Well, good evening then." He stepped down the stairs towards the next landing, his silhouette blending into the darkness. "Sir?" Lamarck turned, pointing a finger at Crow. "I'm already seen as a fly in the ointment, Crow. It wouldn't do for me to be seen talking to a thug." "A thug, sir?" "Confronting delivery people in the hallways, the shoving, shouting threats at tenants? No, I won't be seen with you. I have work to do, real work. Good evening." He turned and disappeared in the blackness of the stairs below. A cold sweat beaded Crow's forehead. "But I haven't done any of those things." Lamarck's voice echoed up the stairwell. "If you belong to a group, you are as bad as the actions of the least disciplined member." The rest of what he said cut out in the closing of a fire door some 3 or 4 flights below. A chill shivered down Crow's body. "Be careful, sir," he called down into the darkness. He leaned against the wall. Damn it, Dagmar. She and the others were going further almost every week. Theirs was supposed to be a campaign of information, of truth. Simply inform tenants of the consequences of ignoring the unenforced load infractions. Change the narrative of the half-truths and outright fabrications of the board. Provide evidence from experts about the instability of the exoskeleton, the Band-Aid effectiveness of the epoxy, and the long-shot possibilities of a successful Operation Steel. Edit and publish Stories, their newsletter, Crow's passion project, to make a pipeline of truth available for understanding the actual structural conditions of the building. Work on the minds and hearts of the very people affected by the negligence and ignorance of the board. Confronting delivery people, protesting directly to tenants, it was exactly the direction he feared that act would take under the leadership of Dagmar. He trudged up the remaining flights, feeling none of the fatigue in his legs, his brain on fire. Why would she do this? When he found and opened the door to the old man's apartment, Crow spotted him with the doormat draped over his shivering torso, his body a yellowish hue, some sickness wicking to the surface. "You're here," he murmured, as Crow picked him up and carried him through the hardly furnished living room to the bedroom, his thin arms wrapped around Crow's neck, the skin of his forearms dry and cold. Crow's fingers slipped into the pockets between the old man's ribs. He couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. "Thank you," he whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Crow set him on the rickety bed and pulled the blankets up over him. Patchy sprouting of a beard grew from his sallow cheeks. the crown of his head overgrown with a thinned shock of white, greasy hair. He smiled weakly. I'm a sight, aren't I? Crow touched the old man's frail shoulder. You're fine, just fine. He smiled, looking into the pale blue eyes. Let me get you that water. He stayed at the faucet with one of the 2 glasses that he'd found in the cupboard, dumping out the cloudy water again and again. He let the faucet run for a minute and was able to get a glassful that was only slightly discolored. He handed the glass to the old man, who drank it dry. More? No, this is good. Crow took the glass, filled it again, and set it on the bedside table. In case you get thirsty later. The old man thanked him, covering his hand over his yellowing teeth. Reaching up, he smoothed his thin fingers over his head in an attempt to press his wild hair into place. Crow watched his self-consciousness. What does your aide even do? She checks my medications, takes vitals. It's all I can afford. I have a walker, he said, pointing to it in the corner. I was just stubborn. I wanted to see if I could get to the kitchen and back on my own. Stupid, really. Just a man wants a little dignity sometimes at this age. Something. He said he wouldn't do it again. Walker or no, I get dizzy if I stand too long. Crow crossed his arms. You have no family? He shook his head. Never married, never had children. Crow wondered if he was getting a preview of his own old age. I'll be right back. Are you sleepy? The man shook his head. No, I'll be up for a while yet. Crow descended back to his apartment and returned 15 minutes later. Taking a pot filled with warm water from the old man's kitchen, he went back into the bedroom and draped a towel around his neck and shoulders. Barbershop treatment, he said. The old man smiled. I'm game. Working carefully, Crow used a dish rag to wet the white hair and then lathered it lightly with shampoo before rinsing it out with the rag. Pulling strands up between his fingers and snipping with scissors, he took 2 inches off and then combed the hair back over the age-spotted scalp. When he finished, he collected 2 handfuls of the trimmings like thatch and dropped them fluttering into the room's garbage can. Let me see the mirror. Crow smiled. Hold on, I'm not finished yet. He sprayed shaving cream into his palm and then spread it over the cheeks, under the nose, and over the chin. Soon after, he began to shave him slowly and carefully with a disposable razor, swishing it clean in the pot of water after each stroke. I'm Leo. My name is Leo. He smiled. Harvey Crow, it's a pleasure to meet you, Leo. He lifted the towel from his thin shoulders and rubbed away the residue of the shaving cream. Can you refill that pot with warm water? Leo asked. He nodded. When he returned from the kitchen, Leo was looking at himself in the handheld mirror Crow had brought up with him. I look okay. You do indeed. Leo put the dish rag into the warm water and then rubbed it into each of his armpits and across his chest protruding with ribs. I feel ready. Crow smiled. Not bad treatment from a thug, right? Leo set the rag back into the brown water. Excuse me? Nothing, he said, shaking his head. He smiled. You look dignified. Leo asked that Crow go into the bathroom for his toothbrush and dental powder. When he did, he found that the bristles of the brush were all nearly flat. After he finished running the nub of the brush over his teeth, Leo smiled. I have one more favor to ask of you, if I may. He asked Crow to go to his closet and retrieve a suit of clothes. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, slowly working his swollen fingers through the task of buttoning a dress shirt. He asked that Crow help him with the topmost button. Tucking the shirt into his pants, he then jump roped a tie over the back of his neck and began the task of tying it. Crow helped him cinch the knot up snug just under the bump of his Adam's apple. Standing steadily, he put his arms back and let Crow slide the sleeves of the threadbare jacket up and over his hands to the shoulders. Ah, a valet. Yes, my lord, Crow said, smiling. He walked around to the front of him. I don't know, Leo. Looking like you do, you might find a wife yet. Leo laughed and asked him to walk near him as he made his way to the bathroom. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I feel 20 years younger," he said, though he gripped Crow's arm for support. Standing in front of the mirror, the old man admired himself, smoothing his hand back over his fresh haircut. "Yes, this is how a gentleman should look." Crow took him by the elbow and led him back into the bedroom and into the bed. Leo pulled up the comforter and then lay on top of it. "Do you want me to put your clothes back?" He shook his head. "I'll be fine. I'd like to stay this way for a while." He laughed. "In the space of an hour, you've seen me wearing an entry rug and now my best suit." "I prefer this look," Crow said as he gathered the toiletries. "I'm going to be back again to check on you tomorrow, okay? Sleep well, Leo." "I believe I will, and thank you for everything." Crow reached down and squeezed his knobby hand. Leo squeezed back as best he could. Returning to his apartment, Crow put everything back into its place. The memory of Leo's grateful face kept a smile on his own. It had turned out to be a good night. He could still feel the wisps of hair between his fingers as though they were still there. Pulling up his blankets, he shut off his bedside lamp and closed his eyes. Tonight he would sleep, he was sure of it. "You deserve it, you're a cheating whore, Anya. Sam, I will never again feel safe around you, never again." Crow had forgotten that he'd taken the towel from the vent up to Leo's apartment. By hearing their hateful subterranean voices, he could feel his exhaustion return, and the idea of retrieving the towel from the hamper overwhelmed him. He turned one ear into the mattress and pressed his pillow over the other, smothering their endless stream of arguing and insults down to a murmur.
And I will finish it tonight.
Well, thank you. If there are any questions, or if others want to finish it tonight. But if there aren't questions, I'll sit over here and visit with people or what have you. But thank you again for coming. It's been a sad affair if you weren't here, just being rude. It will come familiar.
Oh, Belinda just said something about an Audible version, and you mentioned something that may be coming.
Well, Amazon does have a means to make an Audible, and some of you may have ordered Audible books from Amazon, but they have really specific requirements. And I do want to do the reading myself, and I have a film student who has the equipment to record it. I just got to find out from him how much he's going to charge to actually do it. But they have Amazon's, like, requirements are very specific. Like if you just set up a microphone like that and recorded it into your laptop or computer, you wouldn't be able to get the quality that they require. So if I'm going to record something, it'll be after the new year.
Okay. I like when you brought up the characters.
Oh, that's why I do want to. I think I could read it myself. I mean, some I've heard authors read who, you know, have ruined their work for me because their voice gets in my head. Why do you read it like that? That's terrible.
No,
But I got some
pretty
people
good.
say I read okay, so
Yeah.
I'd like to. If I'm gonna make one, I don't want, and then you have to hire a voice person to do it, and get really expensive. And I don't know how many sales an Audible version of it would generate.
I would buy it. There's one.
Well, I'm gonna talk to him. I haven't heard back from him, but I know he's willing to record it when I'm ready.
Awesome.
Do you still write poetry?
Maybe a poem a year. I miss it. I miss working on that, usually that small one-page canvas. You can see the whole thing. Like this thing, like it came out in August, and then I had the layout person kept sending it back to me, so to proofread. So I read it. I I think 14 times in the space of 3 weeks. I hated this book. I was like, nobody's gonna buy this. It's so boring. But it turns out it's really boring if you read it 14 times.
Yeah.
But I'm also happy I did, because every time I caught an error. It's amazing what you read past
Yeah.
and you think, okay, this one has to be clean, and then sure enough, you find another little glitch. Or maybe that Leo guy was just putting them in there to throw my confidence.
Do you think any of your other From the Neighborhood series would become novels? I want the Runner one. I want more on that one.
Why? Why would that be?
No, it's just.
Well, what's Runner one? Because there's distance, and then there's the
The
one
one where he's
gets
going
lost.
through, gets
Yeah.
lost,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, I don't know where that. Yeah, it's just something about Crow's story. It didn't. It just didn't feel like I was done.
Done
With it.
with it.
But I think the Runners. I think of sometimes maybe even a sequel to Rules of Order, but it's.
That's a good idea.
Mhm.
I think it could go places.
Yeah, if the bill. I mean, I don't want to give away.
Yeah, no. I think it could go places.
And I do, and actually Kelly helped me with it. I do, from this same press, they just, I haven't gotten a contract yet, but I wrote, well, in 2020, because I had a little time on my hands, because there was a thing going on. It's hard to see. But I wrote 2 novels in 8 months in 2020. This one, and then another one, which is another branching out for me. It's kind of a gothic horror thing. And it takes place in Michigan. It features lamprey in it. And actually, the main character does what Kelly did. Works for Fish and Wildlife and is treating rivers for lamprey larvae. So that book was just accepted too, and but it could be a year and a half before it comes out. But same press, and I'm pretty happy with how the book turned out.
So that check is coming?
For you? Yes. Get 10% of all my profits.
Part of the research, right, Cal?
No, Kelly helped me a lot with that, and read some sections for me to just make sure that I got the details right.
Could you talk about the motivations of the board?
I mean, it comes out more in the book too, but a lot of greed. There's a lot of, there are the automated factories on the outskirts of the city. There are industrialists that own those who live in the buildings, so they are kind of bribing some members of the board to make them overlook the infractions, and the board messes around a little bit because they keep strict numbers of how much weight is coming into the building and how much weight is leaving the building, but the numbers are all fudged to make it look like there's more weight leaving the building than coming in. So there's just greed behind it primarily.
Sounds like our world. Mhm.
Yeah, greed is, I don't think people are inherently evil, but I do think
Yeah.
they're moved by money to maybe make decisions that aren't the best for everybody.
Mhm. Well, I think this book too, I mean, it's a good read because it's eye-opening for what's going on, with the world, and just being, don't be selfish and look at the bigger picture and make some changes. Yeah. For sure.
Never know, the one point. I don't know to what extent I don't know, the individual level seems, I don't know. It's, when you read the statistics of like the kind of placebo of putting our stuff in recycling bins, and then you find out how little of that actually gets recycled.
Yeah.
Like most of it ends up in the landfill anyway, because, I think the process is super expensive to recycle it, and some of the plastics don't even recycle all that well. So it's kind of hard sometimes knowing that, and you're putting stuff in the bin, and it's like, this is just, I might as well put it in garbage.
Right.
It's where it's gonna end up.
All these houses.
It's good for your own head, though.
Yeah, for your.
Yeah, you wanna feel you're
feeling.
doing something,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of it is corporate. I mean, it's on a huge level that,
I mean, you're not just a consumer. You know, you're trying to do something that maybe gives you a little bit of peace of mind. But around here, the waste management for years was taking your glass for recycling, and for 2 years they were just taking it to the landfill. Then they finally got busted on it. So then they said, okay, well, we're still not taking glass, and the reason is because they're not getting enough money. Because the recycled materials that they recycle is for sale. So they were making the price of glass was down, and they're still not taking it. They're still talking about it. They're not taking it. So, anyhow, that's a little bit.
well, I think I've read something too that, like, again, this isn't like let's just depress ourselves, but you think of that huge body of water not too far from us, and you think that it's something like that, it's gotta be untouchable, and they're actually finding now trace amounts of like pharmaceuticals from people just flushing them. They're concentrated enough that they can actually take a sample from Lake Superior, which is huge, and they can find antidepressants and things that people are flushed down the toilet.
Yeah, it's like finding.
You'd think it would. You think that the lake would
You
be
would
big
think
enough that it would
the
absorb it,
factor
the
would
parts
be-
per million would be so ridiculous that you couldn't find it, and yet we can even mess up a body of water that beautiful and so essential.
Yeah, well, it's not the first one. Look at Lake Erie.
Yeah, Lake Erie used to catch on fire.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the Ohio River.
Stuff. What's that?
The Ohio River, but actually Lake Erie has come back a long way.
Oh yeah, they've done efforts have been made.
So
the
there's
efforts,
some
but
positive
it's-
things
Yeah, I
here.
It's the zebra mussel that did it. Each one of those filters say liter of water a day.
The zebra mussel saved it.
Oh, yeah, that's what, well, besides the fact, all the laws and everything like that, but still, the water was horrible at the western end. But, the zebra mussel was a real outcry because it was going to destroy all the spawning reefs and things like that. And the most it really ever did was fault the municipalities' water intakes. But each one of those things filters a liter of water a day. And the water is now not pea green. It's not like pea soup anymore. It's quite clear.
I see a novel in that somewhere.
I see a novel right here that has most of the answers you need, I think. I could finish reading it, but we'd be here till midnight. So just to take it if you wish. And thanks so much, everyone.
All right.
Coming, it was good seeing you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks,